This is Dr. Fred Smith, Professor of Public Theology at Houston Graduate School of Theology and Director of the the Center for Leadership in Public Theology. And we are here today. I am so fortunate. I mean, I'm just blushing all over the place. I got two of the most beautiful black women I have seen in a long time the same place, and they're sitting at the table with me, and I didn't even have to buy them a drink. Excuse me, I'm sorry about that. This is a religious show. Okay, how are you ladies doing today?
I'm good.
Yeah. Good. Well, we've been having a conversation about health equity. And the center focuses on faith and health, and so we're really interested in this show called Bright Spot about lifting up those places, where these things are happening, okay, or where they could happen, and to educate our audiences about these topics that are so critical to them. So we want to just have an open discussion today. We've had a chance to introduce ourselves and so forth. So let's just talk. So let's just talk with the subject of tell me again, what do you mean by health equity, and how are the things that you're doing in the Health Equity Project, the Health Justice Project, and also the kind of what your church is doing in Windsor Village as it relates to it, or anything else you want to talk about.
Okay.
So I'm just going to be quiet and let y'all talk.
Would you like to?
Well, in the church, related to the Health Justice Project, our role is really to provide faith-based tools and resources to address the concerns we've identified.
Well, let's stop this off a minute. What do you mean by faith-based tools? What are those? What are some faith-based tools?
Resource kits, like one of the things that we're working on is a preacher's toolkit of resources that he could use from the pulpit that mentions these kinds of topics or social injustices. Yes, in the sermon, but also the scriptures that are related to health and social injustice, as well as how we could activate the faith communities to tackle these issues, not just as a community problem, but also as a church problem.
Okay, so if I'm a church leader, how do I get in touch? How do I get these tools? How do I get access to these tools?
Well, they're not yet available now, but they will be available on the healthjusticeproject.com.
Okay.
And we'll freely have those resources available to the public.
Okay, so what else?
Some of the other work in developing the Health Justice Project initiative is also creating things like the symposium, which creates a dialogue or opportunity for people from all backgrounds to talk about injustices that they've experienced in their community. It also allows health professionals, criminal justice professionals, and just regular people, civic leaders and such, to discuss their personal and lived experiences as well as professional solutions that they've used to address the things that they've encountered.
No, I attended that actually, and you can chime in anytime you want to. So what did you learn from that great meeting that you had over there at Windsor Village? You had all those dynamic folks there, panel after panel, a lot of discussion. What was the results of that? What did you learn from that, and what's next?
So I'll say that the symposium came along in trying to first make sure people understood how injustices are created from health disparities, inequities, and just different aspects of space in society, and then how that looks as it's manifested in health. And so we had someone speak about HIV criminalization. We had someone speak about fighting the criminal justice system, or understanding how laws are developed in the criminal justice system, and from that, to be able to give people an idea or a template of how to move forward. We didn't just want to say, here are the injustices, here are the health inequities, here are how things are created, but here are examples of how people have taken that and moved that along. And so my role on the project is the principal investigator. So I, in essence, help to put the project together, collect the research, and then trying to figure out how to implement it or take it to other cities. And I had the fortunate pleasure of Misha, who was a former master student of mine, who we still keep in contact and work with, of course.
Just say a little bit more about that relationship.
Sure. Don't worry. I'll be nice.
No,
and that's why I wanted her to speak first. Jamisha was a master student at Texas Women's University. And I think at the time was in my ethnic and cultural class, which is an online course, and reached out to me. We spoke. She needed, I became the chair of her thesis committee. But when we met, it was like, you are a, unique individual, not in a negative way, but yeah, you are a unique creature. I'll say it like that. Very driven, very passionate. And what I have noticed about her is people who have an impact in her life, she remains close to. And so when she moved to Houston, there have been several projects that I've either called her or she would call me and say, what about this? Can we do this? Things of that nature. But she's very driven. And so I know that if it's put on the table, I'm either going to have to commit to it or, I'm not going to be able to do that, because the honestly, is how the Health Justice Project came to be in Houston. And so she found a grant that she felt would work best and also incorporate the faith-based initiative into it, and contacted me, said, I think we should apply for it, and did. And so having the overarching having the overarching project, in essence, be the principal investigator is great. But I know that the project can't be implemented without having people to be able to work with. And she took it from there in the aspect of it being in Houston. So the number of people that were there, the feedback, honestly would all be accredited to her.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, congratulations.
Yes.
Before we go back to so it's in Houston, what other cities are there in? Tell me more about
Sure.
the other cities.
So I've done a project in Jackson, Mississippi, here in Houston, and there have been Denton, Texas. I cannot forget the first person to work with me on this project, which was another student of mine, Elizabeth Washira. I was her dissertation chair, her major professor for her dissertation. And what she did was she used digital stories. And that's the premise of the project, to help people be able to tell their stories about how their experience with either social injustice or how it's impacted them, it's impacted communities that they know, or how they've helped to address it. Because like I said, we just don't want to come in and say, oh, life is bad. But to be able to say, to give solutions, how to address it. And Elizabeth, as a part of her dissertation, created them and looking at the aspect of the homeless population. And we see an outcome, but we don't take into consideration what could lead, people to be there. I mean, for instance, I work for the state, and the joke is, I'm one summer school contract paycheck away from being homeless.
That's no joke.
Yes. No, not at all. But it's a true life aspect, and we don't realize how close we are to that. We are one mandate away, one health issue away, one unexpected bill away. And ironically, she did it from the aspect of those who provide services to the homeless population. And for some, it was a wake-up call. Like, I know I provide services and I help people address this and to see this and it not be a stigmatizing issue. But for a lot of them, it was like, now let me take a step back, because this could very well be me also.
Isha, I really, when she brings that up, I sort of thought about that as you talked about your work, in the housing project. How did that impact you working with that population, especially when you talked about the older lady, who said, these children, I know it had to remind you of your grandmother,
This particular old lady, she was a little bit more poised than my grandmother. My grandmother would tell it like it is, adult or child. But what I learned in serving the housing community is a lot of these people, or a lot of the residents, they just needed to connect, for one, with one another, because there's strength in numbers, but also really just know what kind of resources that were available in their community and who was eligible for them. And so there's a handful of these older adults ladies that I've established a relationship with for a number of years now, and they've become really strong advocates for their communities. They go out into other communities now and bring back information and tools to educate the residents, and by doing so, they set up like these educational workshops in their community building at the housing project, talking about different things that are important to them. They go door to door, sometimes praying with each other, or babysitting one another's kids, and that's the opportunity where the other can go out and apply for a job. And they also share this information with the grandkids, because a lot of the older adults are raising their grandchildren. And so seeing the grandchildren come out and volunteer in the community with them, because a lot of to stay in public housing, you have to have a certain number of community service hours. And these residents I know, I think it's like eight hours a month. And whenever I'm there, they complete more than 8 hours within a weekend, because they genuinely care, as if they're not keeping track of it. They care about the resilience of their community and what they can contribute. Even if it's not financially, it's something that they could do to help someone else become better, but also eventually move out.
I love that, you know, and I like to stay there just for a moment. You know, one of the selfish reasons, I'm going to be preaching this Sunday at Missouri City Baptist Church.
I'll be there tomorrow.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I'll be there Sunday on the 20th, preaching their senior day.
Okay.
You know, and their title is Seniors on the Move. And I'm going to be preaching from Caleb, you know, in Joshua, you know, where this man, 85 years old, you know, went to this mountain of Hebron, where the giants, the Acans lived, the giants lived, the ones that Goliath, that was his kinfolk. Okay, and Caleb, you know, everybody was scared of that, but Caleb, 85 years, said, "Here, give me this mountain." You know why? Because I follow the Lord wholly, with my whole heart, and that's what I found about elderly people. A lot of folks discount them. You know, they throw them to the side, you know, as though that their lives are over. You know, that all they're supposed to do is sit up in a community center and play cards, you know. But these folks have energy, they have commitment, they have dedication, they have time. They're untapped resource, you know, in our communities that we oftentimes overlook, and they're willing to say their mind. They got worried about being fired from a job. You know, so they have nothing to lose really, but to do, you know, what their passion is. You know, so I just love to hear stories, you know, like that about how the elders of our community, because you know, elders used to be respected.
Used to be.
You know, sometimes I want to cut off my gray beard because this should be a sign, you know, that you know I've been here for a while. I might have something to say.
Yes.
That's why a couple of years ago, I wrote a grant to launch this conference called the Age Matters Conference. And it's an annual conference that we do for adults ages 50 plus, because a lot of the older people that I meet have the same sentiments that you did. And I think it's important that older adults realize that they are intended to live full and productive lives no matter their age, that they have something contribute to society. And for me, it's more so to empower them to see the resources they have available, but also to seek them and learn about what they could do together. So it's more of a social empowerment conference, but also tackling some of the issues that they don't get to hear about outside of the doctor's office or a social phone call from a friend at home.
You might have inferred that I'm really a social psychologist. Okay, and one of the persons, you know, my major professor was Dr. Fowler, who talked about the stages of faith, but his follows the terms of Eric Erickson's social development, you know, and one of the things about Eric Erickson is to talk about that, you know, the integration of the life cycle, you know, is that elders, generativity, have a need to give, have a need to be useful, and to see that that's what generativity is, see that the next generation, you know, makes it over. At the same time, young people have a need for old people, you know, as a part of their industrial, as a part of the finding their identity and so forth. And so here, the grandparents with their grandchildren serving together, you know, that's what it means by it takes a village. That's what the village concept is. But also health. You know, one of the determinants of health is age. not just because our body is deteriorating, but because our usefulness is in question. You know, when people, I'm never retiring. You just forget about that word. I'm not going to retire because I may change jobs. I may change jobs. You know, I may do something different. But you know what? If I look at the statistic, when people retire, they die quicker, much quicker. Because we have a need to be needed. You know, and to be useful. I mean, it's good to travel the world and to have leisure times and but to me, when you get old, you don't have a job because you need to earn a living. You got Social Security pension. You have a job because you have a passion for something. You know, and it's that to me, it's that passion that drives life. You know, people live not just because they have enough to eat or they have good housing. They live because they have a reason to live. And that's what I was talking about, you know, last time about Aaron Eskenazi and Cell-Genesis. One of the chief indicators of health are a book that I recommend is called The Leading Causes of Life. We spend so much time talking about what causes death and how to prevent death. We spend very little time about what causes life and how to increase life. You know, so I think sometimes, especially in the church, we ought to be thinking about not just how we bury people, but what gives people life. You know, and to me, what gives people life is a passion and living out that passion for what you believe in and so forth. So it's not just about a job, you know, or income or making a living, though that is absolutely important. And it's going to be important for the rest of my life because I don't have a pension, nothing like that. But I am doing what I'm passionate about. You know, and to me, that is one of the determinants of health, causes of life. You know, is to be able to be active about what you love and what you're passionate about, and to feel needed and to feel useful. You know, so any way that we can motivate, you know, seniors, you know, to say, you know, your life is not over yet. You know, the community still needs you, and you have an important role to play in the community, and we're going to help you find what that role is. To me, it's one of the greatest things you can do to improve the health of the elderly and to extend their life. That's my sermon for the day.
We also have to, especially one of the things I would always like to say to people of all ages, especially older adults, how can we help you age gracefully? In spite of your chronic illnesses or whatever ailment that you're dealing with, how can we still help you live a productive life in spite of all of that? Because a lot of them, once they get diagnosed with a condition, it's like, well, I can't walk like I used to. So what can we help them do that doesn't require a whole lot of walking? Maybe give them a telephone listserv where they can call people and wish them happy birthday every month. Like call all the people that's their birthday and give them a personalized phone call.
And that becomes their job to get passionate
and
about
things
it.
like that. And it also allows them to communicate with people, still be social, even though they can't physically go anywhere. But what are some other ways in the community that we can do a better job at helping people that have these conditions to still be productive as well?
I just want us to expand the definition of health just a little bit. You know. So go ahead. Tell me more about the Justice Project. I get distracted sometimes when you say something that is interesting. I'm gonna jump on it, so you just as well go ahead.
So it's funny because prior to earlier today and yesterday we have been doing interviews, and it's the aspect of, again, looking at how looking at how social injustice creates negative health outcomes. And whenever people say, like, you know, what does that mean? And can you elaborate? I always say Flint. Just think of Flint.
Okay.
And the best way I know how to describe Flint is, you know good and well, people making decisions would not have put that water source in their neighborhood.
That's right.
So what made it right to do it to anybody else? And they knew they could, because when you don't have, or when you have a lack of power, voice, or influence to fight,
no political clout.
Yes, it's more difficult. And you know, some people knew, a lot of people knew, even those that raised raised interest or tried to raise the alarm, they knew. But still, best way I know how to describe it, Flint. To bring it closer to home, best way I know how to describe it, fracking.
Say that again?
Fracking.
Oh, that's the oral, they practice.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
And in fracking, you forcefully thrust water,
Yeah.
other items into the ground to break up rock for natural gas and oil to be released. They don't frack in the middle of Houston, Texas. Do they frack? They don't frack around the corner. And I'm not believing that the way the system is set up, the natural boundaries of Texas, we don't have those resources in these major cities or in these large urban areas. We frack in rural areas. So we frack where we can get access to land cheaper, a shorter battle or fight. And those who would put up a fight really don't have the voice or the say-so to, or the will to be able, I'm not going to say the will, the voice to be able to be heard loud enough for there to make a difference. And it's interesting because scientists, for instance, Dallas had a lot of earthquakes that just out of the blue, all of a sudden. Scientists, this is a result of fracking. You know, like if fracking, because of where it takes place, these aspects can migrate. No, it's not fracking. And it came from the aspect of everybody in the industry. It's not fracking. It's whatever it was, but it's not related to fracking. Yes. Yeah. Oh no, it's fracking, and it's like when you're a scientist, people who study this, it's fracking. Everybody else, it's not fracking. And my thing has always been, if it's not this, then give me a suggestion for what it is.
That's fake news. Huh?
Yes. And so with the aspect of social injustice, we've been able to do things where people who over time or customarily do not have the most amount of privilege or power or the loudest voice continue to be marginalized, or they continue to experience the negative aspects about it. And what I wanted to show was it's more than race, age, the color of one's skin. For instance, if we take class in redlining, if we look at the division of how neighborhoods are divided now, that's a historical aspect over time where we divided by class. And we still live with that aspect over time. So to continue to do that, there is a social injustice that is social injustice. That's wrong. And so how do we recognize it? How do we get people to share their stories about it and then show? This definitely leads to negative outcomes, especially around health. And in one of the interviews we did today, I told the person, the more and more you tell your story about a social injustice, I feel like the more and more it chips away at you. And when you want to move on and fight, and you have to revert back in telling your story about that time, in essence, you have to go back to that time. And
you have to rewind the tape.
Yes.
Rehearsing the same.
And what I want to do with the project is when you hear, because I also think that in society it's easier not to accept social injustice because you don't have to play a part or understand your role, even if it's individual or systemic. And so I want to give a person one last chance, I want to give the person one last time, I should say, to tell a story. So that as you move forward to fight it, you don't have to operate from both sides. You don't have to operate from the person being marginalized, and you don't have to operate from the side that you are fighting for, because you can't operate from both sides successfully. And taking those stories and being able to share them so that when we do hear things like, oh, racism it's not as bad anymore. It's kind of like, yeah, let me push play on this for you for a second so you can understand that when you say that, you minimize another person's lived experience. And to address that, because we can't address it until we admit that certain things still exist.
Let me ask you two questions. One is, how will people be able to hear these stories? How are you broadcasting it? How are you distributing it? And then the other question is, like unto it, what is your greatest hope for this project? I mean, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, however down the line, you go back, you look back, and you say, this program was a tremendous success. It has done exactly what I thought it was going to do. What does that look like?
Sure. So with how we are sharing the stories, we are capturing them both as digital the best way I know how to describe it, this follows the pattern of doing oral histories. So collecting people's experiences and sharing them right now through our website, which is thehealthjusticeproject.com, as small short videos or actual documentation, you know, in the same concept of oral histories, of being able to read a person's story. Because I want them to be able to, I want people to integrate these stories, not just as something that you read, but something that you shared, something that you used as an example, something that you incorporated. What would be successful for me, is that these stories of fighting social injustice and making change at some point equal the number of stories we hear for people who are experiencing social injustice and the negative health outcomes associated with it. Because I can find a million stories. I can talk about myself, my life, you know, the similarities I found with Sandra Bland.
Well, we may have to have you back to do that.
Yes, but I want to be able to contribute to the other side, and that would be success for me.
All right, fantastic. What about you, Alicia?
For me, I like to see these stories incorporated in educational curriculums. I'm currently learning critical race theory right now from the legal profession, and I'm not a lawyer, but a lot of the things that we learned are real legal stories. Especially think about Brown versus Board of Education right now. The 50th anniversary of the is going to be on tomorrow.
Wow, I didn't know that. Thank you for telling
me. And how much progress have we achieved? And we look back at these particular stories in 2018 in America, and a lot of times I think that when we think about the civil rights movement, for example, we thought we were making a lot of progress, but we've all lived long enough now to see a retrenchment on that progress, to see a reverse in all of the things that we did accomplish. And so for me, I'd like to see these stories presented at professional training and development conferences for not only the legal profession, but also community activists and advocates, so they see the reality of social and racial injustices, and that it really does still exist. But also, what are the why did it happen? How did it happen? And what we can do about it. For example, like one of the folks that we interviewed yesterday in his community, he was responsible for gutting over 40 homes after Hurricane Harvey in an area where...
Unfortunately, we've ran out of time.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure, sir.
I wish we could do another half an hour.
We gladly come back.
Yes.
Gladly come back.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.